I'm continuing with a chapter from Sisters of Maryknoll Through Troubled Waters. This is from chapter 9, A Lamp to My Feet. The Oriental Odysseys of the Sisters have distinct Pauline flavor. In journeying often in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, missioners seem to have been spared that keenest of sorrows, the betrayal by false brethren. Sister Paul, during her years of wandering, called often upon her patron, the apostle to the Gentiles. The first great Maryknoll exodus was from Japanese-held Hong Kong to Kwilin, in the province of Guangxi, reaching by circuitous route to Macao. Hence the Guangzhouwian, the gateway into free China. It was somewhat of an adventure when on January 23, 1943, armed with passes, medical certificates, and boat tickets, the sisters boarded the White Silver Meru. At 12 noon, the boat sailed out by way of West Point and through the channel that separates Lantau from the mainland. In a little more than 3 hours, she made Macao, one of the few Asian relics of Portugal when she was a world power. Her sister Patricia, exiled from Kangmun, dispensed true patrician hospitality to the travelers. It was almost a 24-hour trip from Macao to the Bay of Guangzhouwian. The sea was smooth. The sleeping anywhere was a knock soon acquired in warlands. It was a relief to anxious minds when the officers at the port of debarkation permitted the passengers to transfer to the small boats that would take them to shore. But there were other problems. Sister Paul realized fully that, as welcome as they would be at any Maryknoll mission, she must plan ways that means for the sisters to become self-supporting in works that would not cut into the diocesan activities, nor take from the fast diminishing diocesan income. Sister thought long thoughts, the 13 days it took to make Quillian. The trip was a succession of nights at bad inns, but the sisters made themselves at home, usually took over the hotel kitchen and managed fair meals with the little at hand. Part of the way lay through hill country, bandit-infested. It unwound like a Western movie, when 2 little boys armed with sawed-off guns presented themselves as guards. The aspect was that of a comic. It was January 29th when the group reached Wat Lam, the first Maryknoll station on their route. The fathers offered of their best, news, food, and a lodging in the women's quarters. Here the sisters had hoped for a break in the journey and a chance to rest, but for once bus arrangements could be made that assured arrival in Quilin safe and early. On the morning of the 31st, after an early mass, the group of sisters, with an escort of 2 Maryknoll fathers, set off for the bus station, as happily as tired bodies would permit, writes Sister Christella. It is she who records the hazards of the trip. Our initial gaiety was replaced by misgivings at first sight of our vehicle. It was muddy, small, and dilapidated, seemingly incapable of carrying us, not to mention the 800 pounds that comprised our baggage. The driver assured us it was seaworthy and to have no fear. We arranged ourselves at least uncomfortably as possible about our luggage. Our quarters were cramped, but we could endure it for a few hours, if it meant breakfast in Quilin. Meanwhile, the 3 busmen worked on the charcoal burner, gasoline being an exorbitant luxury, tinkered with what lay under the car's hood. It could scarcely be called an engine, glanced furtively at the tires, ashamed to look at them in the honest light, and then disappeared to have their rice. It was about 10 when we got started. We soon discovered that our bus had an aversion for hills and couldn't take them without help. It had rained, and the road was in sad condition, but our little chariot scattered the mud with an abandon that was quite disconcerting to the rear-end chauffeurs. Our steering wheel, too, was temperamental, so we took both sides of the road without partiality. Our asthmatic horn tooted incessantly. We were in the hill country, apparently, for the car stopped often. Too, it developed an unquenchable thirst, and if we weren't stalling at a hill, we were stopping at a mud hole for water. At dusk, we jolted into a scrubby little town and came to a halt at a hotel which should have been brought up on charges of obtaining money under false pretenses. February 1st, morning came at last, though it was difficult to ascertain this fact in our windowless room. We found our bus awaiting us. There were the same fruitless efforts of lighting the charcoal and tinkering with the engine. Rain began to fall, which didn't help the situation, especially when we were told we would have to walk to the river. There a pulley ferry brought us over to the foot of the hill on the other shore. By now the car was allergic even to molehills. After we all climbed to the top, the bus decided to follow along. Not Quilin, but Lok Chow had become our objective for that day. By late afternoon, everything indicated a night out in the great wide open, but by dint of hard walking, we came to a town. Our previous night's experience didn't make us too eager to spend another night in a hotel, so we were a little heartened to find that one had at least a better facade. The employees, however, looked as though they had stepped from the pages of a Chinese Oliver Twist. That night we brought our own bowls, chopsticks, and spoons to the table, and were most meticulous about using the hotel things. We placed a bowl of disinfectant in the center of the table, and we dipped everything into it before using. February 2nd, the driver tinkered industriously about the car, but we weren't deceived. At a council of war, it was decided that Father Downs take a bus to Lok Chow, with instructions that if we weren't in Lok Chow by noontime, to send out for us. Father departed, and we climbed into our own chariot, and were borne along for a greater stretch than we had ever gone at one time. We were beginning to think Father Downs had made his trip in vain, when we had to get out. Climbing in and out was our day's pastime, until a mountain presented itself. The car took one look at it, ran to its foot, gasped, and died completely. Disheartened, disheveled, we wearily climbed the hill, realizing the bus Father Downs would send would be our only salvation. As we dejectedly sat in a wayside tea-room trying to get a little shelter from the cold, piercing wind, a massive truck going in the opposite direction with a Chinese soldier gesticulating from each window attracted our attention. Thinking Father Downs was indeed on the alert, eagerly we ran to it and were helped in by the soldiers. When the volubility such on occasion always calls forth had subsided, we learned Father Downs had not sent that truck. The soldiers had seen us sitting there, and they wanted to help American women. This was a government truck on its way to the town we had just vacated, and coming back it would pick up our baggage and take us to Lok Chow. We decided to stick with the truck. Father Madsen agreed to stay with the baggage until we came back. We retraced the road we had taken the morning before and back to the very hotel we hoped we had seen for the last time. After unsuccessfully trying to phone Father Downs not to send a truck, as we had a whole army one, we went to eat. Some of the fastidiousness of the night before had been lost. Now we did not disdain to use the hotel bowls, and we forgot such a thing as disinfectant existed. We hurried back to the truck to find over half of it filled with charcoal. There were still 2 boards for us to sit on, so the soldiers tugged us in with a right good will, and for the 3rd time that day we went over the same road, alternating between falling forward into the charcoal and the soldiers landing on top, or else falling backwards with the soldiers on the bottom. The unkindest cut was when our little bus passed us, horn still tooting. Lok Chow at last, being with the soldiers, helped us get through without presenting passports and without a baggage inspection. We were driven directly to the French mission, and when we attempted to give soldiers a cumshaw for their kindness, they emphatically refused it. They said they were glad to be able to do something for Americans. When we said we would tell the people in America how kind they were, that was reward enough. So here we spread the story. At the mission, we discovered Father Downs had gone out about 3 o'clock with a bus for us. We ate our supper, sympathizing with him for the long ride he had had, and bemoaning the fact that we would have to stay over another day. Just as we had accepted the inevitable, Father Downs appeared, so plans were hurriedly made to take the evening train, Kuelin. Then began an epoch-making walk to the station. On account of bombing, the station had been moved out of town, and as we could not get rickshaws, we walked that distance. One does not know mud until one walks in Lok Chow Station. We had no light, which was a blessing in disguise. I think some of us would have given up if we could have seen what we were wading through. Blindly we staggered on. Our arms were weary from the weight of our bags, and our feet scarcely able to move from the weight of the mud. At the 0 hour for our strength, the station light flickered feebly before us. Tickets were brought, and we rushed in, thinking our troubles were at an end. But alas, on the train we discovered they had not the accommodations of our tickets called for, so there was a delay until places could be found. But all nights come to an end. It was the morning of the 13th day, and the travelers were at home in Maryknoll, Kuelin. By 1944, everyone realized that sooner or later all foreigners in South China would have to move out. The bishops and priests were concerned about the safety of the sisters. The sisters were concerned about their charges. Sister Paul's policy, as the danger became more acute, was to leave in a mission a skeleton staff for directive purpose, so long as it could be effected with a degree of safety. This was done at Yangkok, Loting, Pingnan, Wonchao, Lapo, in turn, had to be abandoned. Each group moved on, sometimes joining a community in another town, again finding shelter in a convent from which the former occupants had only departed. The movement was always toward Kuelin. Incidents of these trips are casually recorded. From Chungking comes this narrative of evacuation from Yangkok. Mass was offered at 1 in the morning, a hurried breakfast, and we started on the road to take our girls to a place of safety before we would have to leave the interior. In the stillness about us, the guns some miles to the south sounded ominously close. The narrow path was bathed in moonlight. The shadows creeping alongside made the flight more eerie. The frightened children hardly whispered. Everyone was tense. Then the inevitable funny thing happened. The mission cow, part of the cavalcade, suddenly refused to budge a step further. Pulling, pushing, beating was of no avail. Sister Candida Maria, who knew a milkmaid trick or two, stepped up and gave the heifer's tail a good twist. The beast lurched away from the boy holding the rope and went galloping off through the fields. Sister Dolorosa stayed to watch the baggage, while the rest of the party chased the cow. After the roundup, the heifer was persuaded to follow the cowboy by a mere movement in the direction of her tail. One child lagged behind. Sister fell back with her, and ever so often sister and girl dropped their bundles to rest. The others got out of hearing, and the halting couple had to run the narrow terrace between rice fields and to catch up. They hurried faster in the knowledge that brigands were famed in this section of China as robbers of fleeing refugees. All night and the next day until noon, the sisters plodded along with their orphans, their luggage, their cows. They arrived 10 miles out at a tiny village where Helen, one of the former mission girls, lived. Then, spreading their bedding on the floor of the grain tower, the weary travelers slept for many hours before resuming their journey. All went well until Sister Candida Maria fell and sprained her ankle. It was no place to tarry, and despite the stabbing pain and swelling, the victim limped along with the aid of a stick for another 7 miles, where they found lodging for the night. The third day, bombing was bad, but the group reached Tai Pat intact, to learn that the mission they had left was badly bombed. No method of travel offered any degree of safety, much less of comfort, says Sister Dolorosa. The Yangkok River was higher than ever, and the usual 2-day trip took 4. The poles were too short, and at times the men helped the going by pulling on the great grasses that stretched above the floods. The lads on the shore hauled and jerked, slipped and skidded. The current was strong against us. Living was very simple. The floor served as bed, the chair, table, or bags were our downy pillows. In the morning we folded our sheets and our housework was done. It was hot. There was a little space at either end of the boat where we could sit and get some air, but to get in and out was all right for the daintily built Oriental women, but so for a strapping American woman. It required pressure to push through. On hands and knees, by the time we reached Chunwan, we were stiff and sore. The next leg of the journey was through the mountains. The head man of the village arranged for chairs and an escort of 4 soldiers. The 2-day trip had its risks, bandits and dangers of the bearers slipping along the narrow rice terrace. I had the good luck to sleep through much of it. Lodging was fine for 3 weeks, and then we took to the West River toward Wuchao, and sat out an air battle that took place above us. Then on to Pingham. We came to believe that we moved there for the benefit of the American flyers. One of our missionaries was acting as chaplain, though Father supplies came to us, which we turned into cookies and candies and sent back through the same channel. We almost missed a plane out, finishing a last batch for the Tanchuk airfield. Sister Madeline Sophie and Sister Frances, trying to reach Guilin, had experienced equally as harrowing and more prolonged. We were told to be ready by 2:30 in the morning. 5:30 would bring us into the big city of Kukong. Japan's planes always started calling early, and we hoped to miss them. We reached our destination and had time to buy some northern bread and drink a cup of tea before we heard the air alarm. Almost instantly, the road began to fill up with people hurrying to the hills. They poured out of the city, mostly women and children. Infants were strapped to the backs of their mothers. Small ones clung to their hands. Older boys and girls bore a few family possessions. All wore anxious looks and scanned the skies frequently. We joined the fleeing crowd. A man led us to a trench in the side of the hill, and we fell in flat on our faces. Everything seemed deathly still for a few moments, and then we heard the ominous whir of airplanes. I remember trying to pull a bush with a very few leaves on it over our heads as a camouflage. 6 bombs were dropped, quite close by. Sister and I said the act of contrition aloud. An old woman in the ditch with us wondered what it was all about and looked at us inquiringly. I pointed to the sky and joined my hands in prayer. She seemed to understand. The planes flew away only to come back in a few moments. Now they opened up their machine guns and combed the hills, What an evil sound it is, that rat-a-tat-tat. When things had grown quiet, we went to the old Catholic mission in the city, Kungkong, which is also known as Shuchao, was the scene of Father Matteo Ricci's first labors in China. The sisters' convent had been leveled to the ground. The military had taken over the bishop's house, so all we could do was to cross the river to the convent on the other side. The good effects of our early morning cup of tea were wearing off after some 7 hours. It took the sisters 1 month to make a trip that in ordinary times is made in 10 days. There were nights spent in stations, sitting up in trains, in inns, at native homes. On arrival in Guilin, we applied ourselves and baggage into rickshaws. Then the wheels of my wagon fell off, and my baggage slipped out with me on top. Another rickshaw, and then the rain fell in torrents. We were drenched. In Guilin there was no permanent resting place. Refugees and natives alike received official advice: go west. A little group of sisters flew in early one evening. Guangxi's limestone mountains, rough and ragged, were outlined against the western sky. One thought of Junsin's gods of the mountains, and listened breathlessly for the thump of stone feet. There was something fantastic about the scene, but as they pulled out that night in a boxcar, reality pressed heavily upon them. Sister Eucharista describes the accommodations. The train, which should have left earlier in the day, was on a siding. There we found it about 10 o'clock, and soon we were stowed aboard a boxcar with prophetic material, which was being evacuated. There was a machine gun set up in the middle of the floor in case of trouble. 2 American soldiers were on guard. We sat or lay on our baggage and tried to sleep. About 3:30 a.m., after much backing and shifting, we started on our 36-hour journey. All day Sunday we broiled in the iron boxcar. The soldiers broke their rations with us. We fared well indeed in comparison with the poor Chinese evacuees who crowded on top of the cars in the hot sun and even rode the cow-catcher of the engine. There were 3 routes out of Guilin towards Quangyang and comparative safety: the railroad, the highway, the river. The first was the quickest method, of the most popular, though tickets were sold at black markets prices. The river route was second choice, and the roads were congested with foot-weary people who had no means to pay for other forms of transportation. The exodus was swift and remarkably complete. Just the passage of such crowds through little farms and grain fields, the starving people searching for a bit of food, ruins not alone the present crop, but lowers for years the producing power of the land. This was an agricultural fact that the world must face. The big post-war problem is not to get the people back to their homes, but to renew the face of the earth with that once again it may support its people. Sister Paul left Guilin with the last group of sister refugees. She relates, the train was so crowded that in a compartment for 4, 13 and more were pressed. Aisles were jammed. There was no water, no food, no lavatory facilities. For the 3 days we had to leave the train, climb every mountain, and then literally fight our way back into the train when it finally made the grade, and in China's July heat. We are now real refugees. Heretofore, our moves were by way of our own convents. Now there is no Maryknoll wherein we may refresh souls and bodies. Sister Jean Marie expresses the ardent zeal of the missioner who, dumb, silent Miltons, find it difficult to give voice to their aspirations for the future of the mission apostolate. When with reluctance Mother Earth has shown hidden against her heart her last unknown, when in forehead's breath her span is brought, men having found the secrets that they sought, you still may go, ways none you know. For you in awful magnitude abound, wastes, wilderness, chasms, still unfound, where yet underment of cataracts will roar unto unmeasured depths, and great peaks soar, unscaled into the blue, and nameless things rise from dark silent pools on flaming wings, where through the brush-eyed cold at torrid noon leap into fire beneath a nimbused moon. To win, to master these wild virgin lands, their undiscovered souls, your godlike hands will bear our sun to be their dawn, their day. Then frenzied darkness you will bring to bay. You thus may die where none yet lie. I hope you've enjoyed these chapters I've read of times past from the Maryknoll Sisters through Troubled Waters. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.